and join us. All right, we'll get it kicked off. Good to see you folks in person and on Zoom. We're back to our doing our hybrid meetings. So yes, happy December, everybody. Happy holidays. Welcome to the Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council. I'm David Wu, and yeah, we got a great meeting today. We're joined by some great knowledgeable folks. But before we go to our main event, I will just open it up for any updates or announcements that folks have. Any announcements, updates? Anyone on the Zoom? Go for it, Nick. You can kick us off.
I want to congratulate Peter Warfield for the excellent article for our newsletter about the problems with the Library Commission. I did my own little survey. We have a road to hoe because through a library with 4 cities in California: Los Angeles, Oakland, San Diego, and San Jose, and none of them allow the public to contact members of the commission. None of them put their email addresses on their website. So this is a huge battle. We have to keep working on it. We have to make these officials accountable to all of us. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, thank you, Nick. And then I think Peter has something, and then
other libraries.
saying that, yeah, they don't have their contact information posted.
So I'm Peter Warfield. Just came from a Library Commission meeting. Excuse me. I hope you all read every word of the latest Voice. It has an article that I wrote about some of the background to HANC's meeting here instead of in the Park Branch Library. And that has to do with supposedly changes to the rules requiring all meetings from community groups to be held only during the open hours of the library. Part of the problem is Park has not been open in my memory for decades. On Thursday evenings after 6, they close at 6, and HANC has always met from 7 to 9 on a Thursday. So that means the day would have to change. Meanwhile, the library has cut back every single location that had a 9 o'clock closure pre-COVID and has cut that back to 8 o'clock. So our branch, as an example, Park Branch, is now open until 8 o'clock on Tuesday and Wednesday, not 9 o'clock. And they want people out of there who are having meetings by half an hour before closing. So that means, you know, HANC would have, even if they took a change of day of the week for the regular meetings, it would be a half-hour meeting from 7 to 7:30, basically, unless other changes happened. So there's some good articles in the Voice, mine included, and Calvin on the front page. I came from a Library Commission meeting. I think I mentioned they're working on a strategic plan where they have chosen every single group or person who's providing input. They haven't had any ability in their plan to go forward to even listen to people, for example, at a Library Commission, or who just want to have something to say about what the library is doing and what they would like the library to do in future as part of strategic planning. A completely closed system. And when one of the library commissioners at the last meeting said, well, actually they should have invited Peter Warfield, they actually did not include it in the minutes, basically suppressing, you know, that's their idea of democracy, I guess. Anyway, there's a bunch of politics with regard to the Ocean View Branch Library. Its budget has ballooned. It's become a political football, apparently, between the mayor and the Asha Safai, I think, is he's running for mayor, and it has to do with turf. Whose turf is it going to be on? Their plan to use land on the green belt that's in the Ocean View neighborhood, I think, is very poor. They shouldn't be using green space. They want to build this huge library. And it's right along an almost like a freeway where there's a curve in the road. Cars are barreling along at high speeds. They're headed straight into the sunset at certain times of day. And to cross from one side to the other to get to the library is something like 3 crosswalks. And I was there, and to stand at a crosswalk and know that you can't even see traffic coming from a curved road, and there are no cross roads. So in other words, it's almost like a freeway with very limited access. So I've called that location a death trap. Uh, Somebody else from the neighborhood has called it an attractive nuisance. Anyway, there's a number of issues at the library. Do they really have free and equal access when they keep favoring electronic everything, including publicity, including e-texts, I call them? They're not really books, but sometimes nowadays more and more they have no print version of a book. They only have an e-book. They don't give anybody the access to read something electronically or even listen with earphones on their computers. You have to have your own earphones. You have to have your own CD player. You have to have your own DVD player. If it's a book that's on Kindle, you have to have your own Kindle. And I think that's very unequitable and not free and equal access to the material. So those are some of the issues I'm working on. If you guys have any concerns or interest in working on any of that to make it better, I would love to hear from you in person or by email. Library users 2004 at yahoo.com. And we have a mailbox too.
Thank you, Peter. Was there-
It's not a local issue, but our wonderful supervisor, Dean Preston, introduced a resolution the Tuesday before last on what's going on in Gaza and the West Bank. And they were going to put off the vote till this Tuesday, and now they put it off till January. And as you've probably heard, there have already been starvation deaths in Gaza. So I wondered if anyone has an update on when it will be introduced. And I mean, it's not, it's just very disconcerting to see how little our Board of Supervisors has done so far, even that much. Thanks. So if anyone knows anything more, I'd be interested to hear it.
Thanks. Yeah, I don't have any updates on it other than what you said.
I heard, hi, everybody. Myrna Melgar had, and I'm now in District 7, had quote unquote office hours at Arizmendi on Wednesday morning. And there was a group of about 20 of us who approached her on this issue. She's clearly not supporting the resolution, quote unquote, not as written. But what we were told is it's going to the Rules Committee, and Matt Dorsey chairs the Rules Committee. It could get tabled forever. I mean, it's a disaster. But that's all I know. I don't know. And everybody's on vacation, so it won't go to Rules until January. So that's the latest from as of when.
Thank you. All right, any folks have any other announcements or updates you'd like
Can I
to?
make a comment?
Sure,
I
go for it, Nick.
talked to the clerk in the Board of Supervisors office. I think it was last Tuesday, who reported there were there were people lined up around the full hallway of the city hall and out the door who were commenting on the awful situation in Gaza. So I think there's been enormous pressure attempted to put the supervisors on the record, and I think it's too hot for them to touch.
Yeah, City Hall was packed and there was 7 to 8 hours of public comment given. Yeah, thanks, Nick. Yeah, you can still reach out to your supervisor and the supervisor and Board of Supervisors to urge them to still take action on the resolution. All right, any other updates? announcements? All right. Well, we are for December at HANC, we're focusing on the privatization of Golden Gate Park, the privatization and commercialization of Golden Gate Park. And so we have with us HANC's housing and land use chair, Calvin Welch, to give an update and report on some of the goings on in Golden Gate Park. And we're also joined by Kathy Howard, a HANC member and park advocate, to also give a report and update on more of the goings on in Golden Gate Park. So we'll start off with Calvin first, and then and then we'll go to Kathy up here.
Stand up.
You sit, stand.
Good evening. This is going to be part informational on my part. It's going to kind of be an overview of Golden Gate Park and what I think as a community and as a city we're facing in the foreseeable future. And then Kathy will give, I think, a great example of exactly what we're facing. And if you really want to know, when you leave the meeting, turn to the right, go to Page Street, and look to your left and see the lighted tree that goes into beautiful fluorescent colors. Lighted tree, artificial tree in Golden Gate Park. It's quite stunning and absolutely confirms that Director Ginsburg has the taste of a Carney Barker. So without further ado, first a few facts about Golden Gate Park, may be imperfectly known. It's bigger than Central Park. I mentioned that fact because Central Park attracts more visitors, but second only to Golden Gate Park. So Golden Gate Park is 1,000 acres. It has the most spending per resident of any major urban park in the United States. That's $480 per resident for Golden Gate Park. The national median for large urban parks is 108. Is $108 per resident. So we are very well endowed in public money. Between in the 23 years between 1969 and 1992, there were only 3 park bonds passed that totaled $104 million. So that's 23 years, 3 bonds, $104 million. Since 2000, between 2000 and 2012, there have been 3 bonds placed on the ballot for basically for Golden Gate Park, but for the general Reckham Park. In 2000, $110 million bond, that is to say more than the previous 3 bonds combined. In 2008, another $185 million bond. And in 2012, $195 million bond. All were passed for a grand total of $480 million in bonded indebtedness for the Reckham Park system, mainly in large measure for Golden Gate Park. The other interesting factoid, besides the fact that Golden Gate Park is the second most visited major urban park in the United States, second again to Central Park. But what is stunning to me, in the same year that 24 million visitors came to Golden Gate Park, 14 million came to the GGNRA. That is to say, Golden Gate Park attracted more visitors than the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, which has its visitor total inflated because it includes the Golden Gate Bridge, which accounts for several hundreds of thousands of visitors. The other, I think, critically important to understand factoid is that 13% of the total expenditures through Rec and Park is private money. That is over twice the national average for large urban parks, which is about 6% of their total budget. According to the Trust for Public Land, which is the basis of all of this data, they do an annual big city park review and have done so for several decades. In 2012, San Francisco was rated #1 in the nation amongst large urban parks in measurements that included access, investment, amenities, acreage, and equity. After all of that bond money, in 2023, we were rated #7. Something is happening, and we maybe know, Mr. Jones. Okay, next slide, please. 4 years ago, HANC was vilified for opposing the big wheel, the carousel in Golden Gate Park. And after a very contentious kind of a cultural war in a San Francisco context, a really odd set of political players centered around this issue. YIMBYs were particularly active, and YIMBY-based organizations in the Richmond and Sunset were particularly active in generating support for the carousel. Go figure. It was a sole source contract done by Phil Ginsburg. Once again, I think demonstrating he has the soul of a carny. Next slide, please. It was initially to be here for the 150th anniversary of Golden Gate Park, which got canceled because of COVID. But they nonetheless installed this thing. And shortly after it was open, it was closed because of COVID rules. And so the 150th anniversary came and went. And the argument then became, well, what's fair is fair. They came out here and spent all this money putting up this lovely Ferris wheel. They should be guaranteed a return. So we want to extend the period of this sole source contract. last year, earlier this year, Mission Local did a piece on the revenue generated and visitors of the big wheel, which is perhaps the personification of kind of the privatization, commercialization slash phenomenon that we are witnessing. I mean, in many ways, the wheel was kind of the poster child. So in 2021, the first year that it was operational, it saw 327,000 attendees. Rec and Park got $220,000 in revenue, and SkyStar walked away with a cool $5 million. Well, for a family of four, I mean, this was sold by Rec and Park staff as being an amenity for the families. It would only cost a family of four $60 for a 12-minute ride. But if you wanted to rent a private gondola, leather clad, cigarette dispenser or a beverage dispensers, a private car gondola, you could for $10 a person and no minimum. So, I mean, the best deal wasn't for families. It was for private individuals or private parties who got 15 minutes for $10. 2022 attendees dropped rather significantly, 206,000. Revenue to Rec and Park took a nosedive, 35,000. SkyStar revenue was a measly $3 million. Then from 22 to 23 through June, the bottom fell. 89,000 visitors. So I guess it was, if you've done it once, you've done it for all. One of the main complaints that I've heard people make was you couldn't see over the trees. The goddamn trees got in the way. And you couldn't see downtown because of the trees. And no one suggested that they may trim the trees, but that was not suggested. But 89,000, 15 visitors, 15,000 revenue to Rec and Park, but still a $1.2 million take by SkyStar. So $9 million. The city got, $250,000, $270,000, which probably covers the cost, of the generator. The contract was the city paid the generator, for the diesel generator. The city paid. And now that it has been relocated to a commercial venue on the wharf, on Fisherman's Wharf, the pad is still there, and I'll bet you it's going to take $200,000, $250,000 to remove the concrete pad. Unless, of course, there's another temporary use on the concrete pad. Next slide, please. So all in all, the big wheel didn't keep on rolling, and Proud Mary left the park, and it's perhaps folks remember several years ago, Rec and Park, against community objections, agreed to lease Kezar Stadium to a professional soccer team. And this soccer team it was going to generate significant revenue, but more importantly, it was a way in which the Rec and Park Department and all San Francisco could open its heart to Latinos because Latinos play soccer. So it was totally and completely sold. It was sold to the merchants on Haight Street that these crowds are going to come and they're going to show. Unbeknownst to any of us at the time, Rec and Park, in fact, leased out part of the parking lot to food trucks that they got revenue from. Once again, kind of like a carnival. The big change was last year in the vote to finally, after being defeated on the ballot 3 different times, closing JFK to cars. And it was community led. It was an initiative. And as soon as the measure qualified for the ballot, a whole new set of players came forward to run the campaign. And the campaign was run in unison with a YIMBY ballot measure on housing that would have redefined affordable housing, amongst other things, as being housing able to be afforded by people earning about $50,000 a year, that the city could subsidize that level of affordability using public money. That would now be called affordable housing. The measure failed, but Golden Gate Park, JFK Drive was close to the automobile. For those of us who live next to the park, and I should have said at the start, this organization is made up of boundaries surround the Panhandle and are adjacent to Golden Gate Park. This organization, the Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council, was founded, not necessarily incorporated, but founded as an organization to oppose the Panhandle Freeway. The Panhandle is the oldest portion of Golden Gate Park. It was John McLaren's nursery. In the Panhandle is every major species of tree that was to be planted in Golden Gate Park. And it was not every species, but a large variety. You can see the different kinds of eucalyptus trees, for example, that are now beginning to die. But there's all kinds of trees in the Panhandle, and it was kind of a living nursery. The issue became, for those of us who have a long history with Golden Gate Park, both organizationally and individually, most of us who live here live adjacent to Golden Gate Park, certainly within walking distance. It certainly plays a major role in our neighborhood's life. When things happen at the eastern end of Golden Gate Park, things happen on Haight Street. Things happen in the neighborhood. So there is a very close link between the people of this neighborhood, organizations of this neighborhood, and Golden Gate Park. So one would have thought that there would be some sort of planning process, some sort of public planning process for what was to happen to a closed JFK. How was it to be? How was it to be done? What kinds of ideas existed to transform a 4-lane road into a part of an urban park that would allow bicycling and skating and dancing and stumbling and rolling in wheelchairs and all kinds of things. Well, there wasn't. There was no public process. What I've been able to find is a report to the Rec and Park Commission, done on September 15th, 2022. That is to say, 3 months before the election. And it's from Dana Ketchum, who is a director of property management. And many of us are familiar with Dana, as she is the staff person to the Kezar Stadium Advisory Committee, which the Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council is a part, and was a strong proponent of the professional soccer team at Kezar, the late failed professional soccer team. Does a memorandum to the commission, a report. Here it is, strategic plan, overview. Next. And here's some selected terms. The department is working on a variety of projects to try different placemakings to explore the best locations. Just pause for a moment. We need placemaker activities in Golden Gate Park. You'll notice that one of the things that has happened on JFK Drive is there now a big rock that says Golden Gate Park. Very helpful. That's a place-making activization. To try to different placemaking, explore the best locations and activations for the promenade. The promenade needs to be activated. I live a block and a half from Golden Gate Park, from the Panhandle. I have raised 2 children and am in the process of raising 4 grandchildren, all of whom spend a good portion of their life in the Panhandle and Golden Gate Park. I walk daily in the eastern end of Golden Gate Park, down JFK. And it's an incredibly active place. There are all kinds of things happening. There are all kinds of people doing active things in the park. Participants include the SFMTA, those fun-loving folks, Illuminate for the Arts, Paint the Void, both the department's Recreation Division and Capital Division, musicians and local food purveyors. All installations will be temporary installations and can be easily reversed, modified based on public feedback. So that's how they roll. They do whatever they want to do until somebody screams. I mean, nobody from the department, and certainly the commission, isn't asked to oversee these activizations. It's going to be based upon public feedback. Next slide. New music busker program. During the pandemic, the department heard from a number of musicians interested in being able to be permitted to perform in Golden Gate Park as buskers. The department researched other busker programs and is ready to launch this program with a busker stations along JFK Promenade. Buskers will apply for a license. Fees waived for the first 6 months. And then we'll sign up for various locations on certain days and times. This busker program will not allow amplified sound. Illuminate, remember their partner? Illuminate will be permitted to coordinate a regular schedule of free, modestly amplified live music shows in 2 additional locations, in addition to offering open mic time when performers can sign up to play. So, next slides, go quickly through them. Alvord Lake is going to be a location. Go ahead. Conservatory Tunnel. Back in the day, people have been playing music in that tunnel for almost as long as I've been using Golden Gate Park. Next. George Washington Tree. Burns statue. 9th Avenue Bridge South. The Rose Garden South. Across from the new beer and wine garden. Didn't know about that one. Read the report of September 2022. Evidently not at the Rose Garden. One more. I think there's one more. Okay, crossover under the South Pass. No problem. Interesting, though, that Illuminate. Remember the lighting, the LED lights on the Bay Bridge? That was Illuminate. And you remember what happened? It was going to cost $4 million. He lined up wealthy people, deep pockets. He's well connected with the ED of Illuminate, with the tech community. And it's, after all, electricity and light. Well, it didn't work out over time. Couldn't maintain it, was too expensive, and the lights went out. And he ended up asking for general support from the general public for $11 million, didn't get it. So there are no lights, but on the bridge. But Illuminate will be running this busker, multi-location busker program, in which providers pay a fee, and it's unclear how that works. Do they pass the hat? Do they? Does any money change hands? And we don't know. And the Rec and Park did not sign an agreement with Illuminate. So there's no way of knowing if they're paying prevailing wages or meeting other contract obligations of a city contractor. This was totally done by staff. And just to sweeten it up a little bit, Illuminate gets 2 additional sites that may have modest sound amplification for their own performances, and one assumes there is some sort of passing the hat or some sort of money collection at those 2. But we don't know. And all we know is what is in the report. But we're talking about 11 locations along, well, we don't know of 2 of them. We don't know where the 2 additional ones are. But we're talking about multiple locations along JFK Drive in which there will be small events. Could be great, maybe not, but we don't know. And the only way that we'll be able to change it is to give Rec and Park feedback. Okay, next. This is one of the contractors that, or art groups that illuminate and paint the void. The other artistic advocate group have selected for, this is just west of Peacock Meadow. People familiar with Peacock Meadow? Yeah, you can see it from here. It's, look at it. Next slide. I have no idea. I have no idea. This is Peacock Meadow. That's a tree. And it doesn't glow at night. But it's an awfully pretty tree, which brings me to the philosophical conclusion of this presentation, which is the thing about Golden Gate Park is that it's a human-made natural environment. It is a contradiction. It is a human-made natural environment. They have only in the last 15 years, through, in many ways, the advocacy of Greg Garr, who I think is watching, have they started planting native plants in Golden Gate Park. There's virtually none of the trees are native. Few of the plants are native. But they were a palette and a landscape created out of sand dunes to replicate nature with a 19th century sensibility. And so, you know, John King has recently named the Conservatory of Flowers one of the 10 most beautiful buildings in San Francisco. And I'm not going to argue with him. And there it is in the middle of a park. And it works. And virtually every other activization that the guys and gals did in the 1870s, 1890s, worked and created this natural environment in the midst of a city. So when we talk about activating Golden Gate Park, we have to understand that it was already activated, that we're talking about the second activization, or maybe the third activization, and not be so arrogant to believe that we are the first that is activating this otherwise passive environment of Golden Gate. The thing about Golden Gate Park is that it is a natural environment created by human beings in the middle of the second most dense city in the United States. Finally, the problem with the privatization that oftentimes slips into commercialization of activating Golden Gate Park, which the current Rec and Park administration so admires, is that it removes any connection between what is happening in the park and the people who use the park or live around the park. That's what the commission was created to do. And I mean, originally there was a recreation department, and there was a parks department. And in the wisdom of the charter writers of the 30s. They merged the two into a department that recognized the recreational use of parks, which was a wise, I believe, decision. So when we talk about activization of Golden Gate Park, the emphasis should not be active to the eye, but active to the full, body and, if you will, mind, which is the natural. That's the miracle of the natural environment of Golden Gate Park, is that it brings out in urban dwellers a desire to walk or run or ride a bicycle or sit in the middle of a meadow and watch the light change. To get outside of their urban existence and outside of themselves. And that's the first activization that we must do everything we can to preserve. And the problem of sole source contracts, of staff going off and with a few hand-picked nonprofit arts groups, we have no way of knowing who these people are, for whom they're actually activating the park for. And a gulf exists. And so there was a great hue and cry 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and Friends of Rec and Park was caught involved in a growing corruption scandal involving the Department of Public Works, and some question as to whether or not the Parks Alliance was a willing conduit of special favor money that flowed to the Department of Public Works through the Parks Alliance. There was a tangled web of financial relationships that were shrouded in deep murk. And there was a great hue and cry. And Rec and Park agreed to a reform. And in 2021, reformed the process by which it engages in these relationships with nonprofits. It doesn't ban sole source relationship. It doesn't require that there be some sort of request for qualifications, some sort of open bidding process. It doesn't require it. They can still sole source a contract, handpick 3 people that they're going to talk to. That can still happen, except in 2021, Supervisor Chan asked the city's budget and legislative analysts to look at the reforms of Rec and Park and see if other things could be done. And there are 2 that I think go straight to the problem. The BLA asked that request that Recreation and Parks Department amend the Master Memorandum of Understanding. Sorry, this is a little bureaucratic, but we're dealing with bureaus. To amend the Master Memorandum of Understanding with the San Francisco Parks Alliance to specifically prohibit solicitation of contractors by the Parks Alliance for in-kind services to the Recreation and Parks Department based on contractors' donations to the department or the Parks Alliance, and or their personal relationships with employees and officers of either organization. Really? That's not required? Nope. And second, request that the Recreation and Parks Department add a requirement that the San Francisco Parks Alliance solicit contractors for in-kind services provided to the department through a request of qualifications process to better ensure that contractors selected are the most qualified at the most reasonable price, and to consider financial disclosure requirements to reduce the potential for conflicts of interest in the contractor selection process. It seems reasonable to me and outrageous that it's not required by Rec and Park. And that's the problem of the September memorandum, of the list of who was invited to come up with a plan, the granting of special privilege to illuminate. They are going to be vetting all of the acts for the buskers. Illuminate is going to be, and for this, they get to do 2 presentations themselves at locations yet to be determined. Paint the Void is has partnered up at least twice with San Francisco Forward. Those of you who subscribe, or you can come to the HANC site. I'll have a copy of the piece. There's a 7 December 43 op-ed that describes the experience of a young San Francisco muralist artist, Messi Beck, who was hired by Paint the Void, or part of a process put together by Paint the Void, was in fact paid to come up with a series of hangings, wall hangings, paintings, murals for the APEC Council, for the group that was cleaning up the street. And when the mission kind of changed, it was to be 11 performances or showings in each supervisorial district. That fell back to just 1 in the cut. And the promotional material for that event, including which included this woman's art, was Together San Francisco. The Moritz funded organization that did fentanyl light in the Tenderloin, which was also artists' work. The woman was so outraged when she found out about Paint the Void's relationship with Together SF. She withdrew her original posting and did a new mural, which says, "Ethical billionaires don't exist." The artwork was completed, but it's never been shown, and it's in a warehouse somewhere. So the relationship of Paint the Void, of Illuminate, who their donors are, who sits on their board, is important information that they do not have to disclose under Rec and Park's policy. And the legislative analyst urges changes that would in fact change that. So that's the long overview. And I appreciate either your attention or sleepfulness. I don't know which. But Kathy will, I think, illustrate exactly what is wrong with the process. Come up here. I'll be happy to answer questions.
Okay, great. I'm adjusting to now being farsighted, thanks to my surgeon at UCSF and my cataract. But for near vision, I for near vision, I have my librarian glasses, but I'm not used to this yet. So patience, please. Okay, so I am ready. My name is Catherine Howard. I know a lot of you. I've been involved in a lot of park stuff over the years. I made the mistake of going to a public meeting 20 years ago. And I always tell people don't go to public meetings because this is what happens to you 20 years later. That was in the concourse when they were building the garage. And one of the plans was to cut down all the trees in front of the band shell because it would be cheaper to build the garage that way. So I went home and I cried. I still cry thinking about it. And I said I could cry or I could do something. So I started going to meetings and it was amazing. We had success. We stopped the cutting of the trees. We landmarked the music concourse, and we is a lot of people, including some people in this room. And that really spoiled me because we were successful, and it's really, really hard in the city to fight these forces. So I appreciate everything that everybody here does and everything Calvin is talking about. I want to second. I'm with a kind of a new group we formed a few years ago when the Ferris wheel showed up. We call ourselves San Franciscans for Urban Nature, SFUN, and we're just local community members who are concerned about protecting nature in our city and parks. And we have a very basic website at sfurbannature.org, or you can reach us through sfun@sonic.net. So, slide 1. There is a new nonprofit, the Gardens of Golden Gate Park, which includes the Botanical Garden, the Tea Garden, and the Conservatory of Flowers. Am I doing okay with sound? Okay. Okay. The Gardens of Golden Gate Park, a GGGP, is a private, nonprofit, part of a 2022 private-public partnership with the Department of Recreation and Park. Slide 2, please. Okay. So while he's bringing up the slide, in mid-October, the Gardens of Golden Gate Park issued a new request for proposals for nighttime light shows in those gardens. That could be the Arboretum, the Tea Garden, or the Conservatory. And I'm sure you all heard about it. And no, because it wasn't made public, they just issued the RFP. The RFP says the gardens seek to develop a high quality and unique winter lights installation, authentic to the mission and brand of the gardens and our local community. This event is intended to drive members and visitation to the gardens after regular admission hours from mid-November to early January 2025. Open to multi-year proposals. And said this RFP was issued in October with a timeline days for companies to come up with proposals. So I'm guessing that they knew who they wanted, and those companies knew about this ahead of time, because 30 days is a really short period of time to come up with something like this. The RFP is quite complex, and it would have taken quite a while to do it. We're still on page 1. There we go. Okay. So here's the statement from the RFP. And we'll go on to the next slide. So we have 3 concerns: impact on the environment, impact on people, and the lack of public process. Okay, slide 4, environmental concerns. The RFP recognizes that the San Francisco Botanical Garden at Stribing Arboretum is a 55-acre living museum of plants. But this living museum supports wildlife, birds, mammals, and insects. Nowhere in the RFP do they mention wildlife or habitat. Here's the Arboretum. Okay, the next slide, please. The RFP ignores the impact of artificial lighting on wildlife. Wildlife needs darkness at night to thrive, and in some cases, even to survive. For example, too much artificial lighting can have an impact on birds' life cycles and nesting patterns. Birds can be drawn off course due to artificial lighting, resulting in disorientation and collisions. Golden Gate Park is on the Pacific Flyway, and as such, thousands of birds pass over the city at night. Insects are negatively impacted by the presence of artificial nighttime lighting. Insects are vital to the food chain, but their populations are in decline. The next slide, please. So you're wondering if this is sort of rather obscure information that perhaps the board of directors of Gardens of Golden Gate Park might not know about. However, if you did a Google search of negative impacts of artificial life on wildlife, it brings up 15,400,000 results. And yet the RFP ignores the impact of artificial lighting on wildlife. Yes. The RFP makes no mention of trying to minimize park lighting to protect dark skies. This photo from the RFP celebrates having bright lights that point skyward. Furthermore, the RFP ignores the cumulative impact of adding more lighting to the park. Golden Gate, as we know, is already lighted with 150,000 watts at the soccer fields, with new lighting for the tennis courts, with security lighting for weeks before and during concerts, and with lighting for other special events. And of course, now we're going to have Illuminate going all over the place, adding lighting to the park. The next slide, please. Quiet nighttime areas are important for wildlife health, providing rest and cover from predators. Bats can be impacted by sound pollution at night when they are hunting, resulting in failed feedings, collisions, and mortality. And yes, there are bats in Golden Gate Park. The project will introduce noise and crowds to areas that are quiet at night. The RFP wants to attract 80,000 to 180,000 people over a 2-month period. That is either 3,300 people every night or huge crowds on weekends. It also allows for music or other amplified sound. What about people? The RFP lists a goal of addressing nature deficit disorder in children. This is a term used to describe impact of people becoming alienated from nature, which we see in our young people a lot with the devices that they're so entranced with. There's a whole book that started this idea, Last Child in the Woods. But the RFP values artificial attraction of a light show over the quiet and darkness of the natural world. Ironically, this could contribute to nature deficit disorder, and yet they say they are helping bring children into nature. But the message is that nature is not really very interesting unless it's been turned into an attraction. The RFP also discusses increasing the diversity of garden attendees as a reason for the light shows. This implies that some demographic groups need artificial stimuli so they can appreciate nature. I personally find this very offensive, and I know quite a few people who supported us on the soccer fields would also find this offensive. But you don't need my personal opinion. Studies show that those quote unquote diverse populations, they already prefer naturalistic landscapes over urban environments. And I've given a lot of general facts on environmental thing. SFUN, we did a 4-page letter. The last page is all footnotes. All of this stuff can be referenced, and I brought copies for people tonight. So you don't have to go through the 14,500,000 Google searches. Slide 10. And then the lack of public process. So we could find no efforts to inform the public about this either before or after issuing the RFP. And the process for a nonprofit in a public-private partnership is different from projects that come before the commission. So we came up with this little diagram, which is the next slide. Okay, so those of you who have been down to Rec and Park, they have a proposal. There's public notice of the meeting, and there's documents, which sometimes they'll even post before the meeting. There's a Rec and Park committee. There's public comment. Then there's the commission with public notice required and public comment at the commission. Now, I know we've all been down there and haven't been able to persuade anybody, but still there's notice and opportunity. After that, if a project is over 10 million, it goes to the Board of Supervisors for approval. Or if it's a historic landmark, for example, it goes to the Historic Preservation Commission. So we have a robust public process for projects. But with the Gardens of Golden Gate Park, with this private-public relationship, which I'm not good at this stuff. Calvin's a lot better. I'm still trying to figure it out, but we've had people working on it. There was no public notice. RFP was set out on October 13th. No public notice. The Gardens of Golden Gate Park Board, which meets privately because it's the board of a nonprofit and that's what they do, but met on December 8th, and they've selected someone they're going to look at already. Wow, wasn't that fast? And we are trying to figure out what's happening, and I don't have information tonight on how these things work. We believe through the article in the newsletter, somebody wrote in and said, well, these nonprofits have to have public meetings twice a year to give input on stuff. We're not sure if that would include this kind of project. But what has happened is that Rec and Park has cleverly created this organization that is so far outside the public process that you're not finding out about things. And my feeling is that they created this on purpose because they knew they wanted to do things like this. And they figured, here's how we're going to do it. You know, we had all that pain in the neck stuff with the Ferris wheel, so we're going to do it this way. And I'm probably being paranoid, but the old saying, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean no one's after you, I think applies, especially when you're dealing with a city or with Rec and Park. So in conclusion, there are the problems with the RFP, the negative impact of light and noise on wildlife in an important habitat area. Remember, there is a California native plant garden in the Arboretum. And native plants need insects, they need wildlife, they all need each other. And this is what we're going to activate. There's the cumulative impact of further reducing dark skies over Golden Gate Park, the value of artificial attractions over just appreciating nature, the lack of notice to the public, and the limited public process for decisions about our public land. And people say, oh, it's Rec and Park's land. I just want to remind everybody, Rec and Park don't own it. They don't own anything. They manage it. That's it. It's our land. This is our land. And we need to repeat that to people. This does not belong to them. So, last slide, please. So, despite the lack of public process, you can still contact people. So please write to the Gardens of Golden Gate Park. Ask them, you have a native plant garden. What is this thing you're doing to this wildlife habitat? Talk to your supervisor. Write to the commission. Make life difficult and uncomfortable. And the Commission on Environment, which doesn't really get involved in stuff, still they are the commission on the environment. If you have other groups, tell them, contact friends on social media. Tim Redmond had a great article in 48 Hills on the public-private partnership thing. He was at the last meeting. I had a little flyer I had made up, and as he was leaving, I said, Tim, and I said, I wanted to give you this. It's about Rec and Park. And he said, what is it? I said, well, it's a public-private partnership. And he stopped me and he said, you had me at public-private partnership. So he wrote an article on it. I advise you to read it. And then the Richmond Review Sunset Beacon, Tom Pendergast has done a very thorough article. He tries to be fair. He has both sides, but they take comments. And if we all write in comments, then that shows the editor that that was a worthwhile article and people read this and we have to get the word out. We have very limited media sources. So whatever we can do to let people know. And if you do write letters, if you could share them with us, that would be very helpful. And I think that's it. And I have the 4-page letter we wrote if you would like it.
Yeah, we can. Yeah, thank you, Kathy and Calvin. We'll open it up for questions and discussion or comments. Yeah, any?
I got a question.
Okay, we'll start with you, Nick, and then we'll go into the room and we'll bounce around.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
Thank you, Kathy, for an excellent presentation, and also Mr. Welsh. I have a similar question to the one Mr. Warfield has been so boldly helping us understand, where the members of the Library Commission, we have no direct way of contacting them, and that appears to be lawful as far as we can tell, except for the Sunshine Ordinance Task Force. Now, do we have the same problem with the Parks Commission? Do we have any way of contacting and emailing every single member individually of the Parks Commission? Can we do that?
No, you have to write Rec Park Commission, whatever the address is I put on there. They do not, unlike the Planning Commission or the board, they do not share individual email addresses. Also, I've run into this before with a prior commission secretary. I don't know if Ashley does this, but I'd send letters and they'd say, oh, we wait till the topic comes up and then we give them the letters. So the best thing to do, I don't know if Ashley does that, but the best thing to do, you'll have to go down there and talk to them.
The general rule is write to commission, write to the clerk of the commission. And the general city rule is if the clerk receives a letter, it goes into the file that is given to each commissioner for that meeting, or on the subject, if that subject is on the agenda. So it's important not to write to the department. It disappears. The department's under no obligation to respond to anybody. The commission is, which we should remember when we face a ballot measure calling for a reduction of commissions.
Great, thank you, Nick. Other here.
I was assuming that fake light up tree was just for the holiday season. Is it actually more permanent than that? You know, the fake tree, you know.
No, I believe it's one of the experimental. It's one of the experimental activizations for the Christmas spirit. They come and go. There was an installation last year of smaller trees in Peacock Meadow itself for about 3 weeks, but they come and go. To the best of my knowledge, it's not permanent, but if it is, the process outlined by the Rec and Park staff is that we've got to complain.
This is Peter Warfield. We asked for the addresses of the library commissioners because I believe that we're entitled to get in touch with our government under the Constitution and in other ways. The city librarian refused. The commission didn't respond. We took it to the Sunshine Ordinance Task Force, And they've ruled unanimously that the commission email addresses had to be turned over, even though they said they were using so-called private emails, which as far as I'm concerned was just, a ploy. There was also a case in San Jose that was cited where I believe the mayor and anyway, some officials in government were using their personal cell phones to do city business. And they were taken to court, and the court ruled that they have to turn over any city business that they're doing, no matter where it resides. If it's on their so-called personal telephone, that's still public information that is subject to open government law. So we got a unanimous ruling, and where it stands now is that the library actually said, we don't care about the ruling of the Sunshine Ordinance Task Force. We're still not going to give you the email addresses of the library commissioners.
I'm going to refer this to Bruce.
What Peter said was absolutely correct.
Thanks, Peter.
Hi there. You described very eloquently how the Parks and Recreation Committee, any actions that they do are subject to public consultation, a series of procedures, notifications, and meetings. So I just wonder how the public-private partnership managed to elbow its way in there and sidestep any of that. Yeah, so was there never any discussion of that? Was that just enabled? Who enabled that to happen?
No, that's the problem. The Board of Supervisors is prohibited by charter from actually drafting an ordinance that would correct that. It is the most that they can do is to request the department to do ABC. They can put a ballot measure on to have Rec and Park do A, B, C, or D, but they cannot direct Rec and Park to do anything. They can't direct any department. As I say, they're banned by charter. They could be declared committing malfeasance of office and removed from office if they interfere in the inner workings of a department. The amazing thing that has happened is, in my view, the co-optation of the nonprofit model. Nonprofits play an extraordinarily important role, especially in the field of health and human services in San Francisco. Almost all of the direct services to homeless people, almost all of the direct services to indigent people, certainly almost all of the affordable housing services provided to people, most of the drug treatment program, most of the mental health services that are provided by the city, as inadequate as they are provided by nonprofits, not by the city departments. Yet, in any contractor with the Department of Public Health, for example, or the Department of Human Services, has to submit to has to submit a bid. There's a request for proposals that is very arduous. You have to list in that request for proposal who's on your board, who's giving you money. All of that is part of the application process that somehow Rec and Park, by not paying directly for services, merely consults with a nonprofit entity who is not required to submit any qualifications, not required to submit who's on their board, who funded them, because they're not being paid. They're not doing a fee for service. They're not performing a service contract. So there's this really gray area that, for example, our Department of Public Works director took absolute example and developed the relationship of what in the business is known as behested payments. I don't want a fee from you, but if you would contribute to Friends of the Department of Public Works, that'd be cool. No, I'm not going to charge you a fee, but if you contribute to my nonprofit, that's good. That it's not a contract. It's a requested donation, if you will. And the difficulty comes in the story that was in the op-ed in the Chronicle on Paint the Void, one of the two art nonprofits that Rec and Park partnered with. And their relationship with one of the wealthiest men in the world. And a man who is deeply engaged in proposing important and deep systemic change in in San Francisco. Changing the charter, changing the role of commissions, giving the mayor more power. Mayor Breed does not have enough power. We're going to give the mayor's office more power. This guy turns out to have a direct relationship with Paint the Void. And Paint the Void shows up when he wants artists to come up with a cartoon that ridicules the fentanyl crisis. So it's a very interesting new world that we must be aware of, and we must come up with countermeasures. And I, for one, don't believe that it's writing the commission. I think it's probably drafting a charter amendment if we're going to deal with it in a public way.
So I'm not that familiar with the contracting process in San Francisco with regards to public-private partnerships. Okay, there's the private part that you have whatever that private entity is, but then you have the public part. And I'm still kind of, I'd have to read up on it. I'm not quite sure whether the public part still requires public hearings or public exposure or anything like that.
I submitted you the report of a public hearing. Everything was signed, sealed, and delivered. Everything was decided, and it was reported to the commission. And the commission, in public, said, "Thank you very much, department. Go ahead." And you know, if we had known, we might have been there. And had we been, I don't know how it is that, I don't know if this working group had minutes. I don't know if it was subject to Brown Act requirements and open meetings. Certainly nobody invited the Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council to attend any of those meetings. So that's the challenge that we face, which is there is a legitimate role for nonprofits in public life in San Francisco. They do work that no one else will do. They're like immigrant labor. They do it cheaper than the city department. and they do jobs that not many people want to do. And they deal with populations that are troubled. City departments don't want to deal with them. Not even the police wants to deal with them. So they will literally dump them on nonprofit agencies. Especially in health and human service and affordable housing, nonprofits play a critical, important role in delivering services. And it's done through open contracts, open bidding, who they are. They're 501c3s, they're not 501c4s or 501c2s, in which you can obliterate who your contributors are. A 501c3 can't do that. Everybody that gives them money has to be listed. The difficulty is the other side, the evildoers have figured out a way to use nonprofit shells in a very creative way that really only works if it is somehow connected to money, to private money. Because if you can mobilize private money, you don't need public funding. And if the public agency defers to the privately funded nonprofit to set policy and program, then it becomes very difficult for people to affect that relationship. I just want to remind you, again, I'll put this on the hang board of the memorandum of 22, of September 22. These are temporary activities that will go on until people object. So, I mean, it's really, folks, anything goes till the whistle blows. And we got, we've got the whistle, even though we didn't even know we needed a whistle. They're not going to stop. They're going to work out these plans and programs and implement them. And increasingly with private money in a public space. And, that's a real first world problem, This is a very wealthy city with hugely wealthy individuals who can, if they choose, instead of endow the opera or the symphony, can buy a city department. Some will have argued for some time that the San Francisco Police Department has been kind of a rental agency for some time, that it's more beholden to the police than it is to the people, that it responds to the Police Officers Association more than to the general public. That's one thing. But what Rec and Park is doing is kind of one step beyond that, taking public space, public facilities. Remember, between 2000 and 2012, $500 million in general obligation bonds. You know what the total payback of that $500 million in bonds are? The rule of thumb is about 5 to 1. Interest and carrying cost of bonds. That's why bonds are not a good way to fund the public wheel unless there's no other way, because we're going to be paying back $2.5–3 billion for that 500 million, but we get to use it up front. But if in fact it is programmed by private entities that are privately paid, and those private nonprofits take the place of the public, then we've got a very serious civic challenge.
Other questions or comments? I forget where I read it, but there was an article about the big no dancing sculpture thing in the park, and one of the main organizers of the skating area where they're all on roller skates there really disliked it and was offended by it. Yeah, and so that goes back to they just dump it there, and a lot of it is like old Burning Man art, which
Correct,
I think
correct.
makes it even worse.
It's kind of recycled Burning Man. They ran the HANC Recycling Center out of Golden Gate Park, but we now have the Burning Man Recycling Center going on Kennedy Drive. I mean, those bizarre dog and cat human being creatures on porpoises and whales. Well, there's no question, you know. There's a rather crude line from an Alec Guinness movie in which he played a absolutely terrible artist, but he had great spirit as an artist. And his good friend said, "Look, John, farting through a keyhole is hard, but is it art?" This is, you know, what's happening on Kennedy Drive seems to me to be kind of an afterthought, and it is the work of Paint the Void and Illuminate. Those are the people who are picking the art, and it turns out Illuminate has a relationship with Burning Man. Oh, I don't, I have no idea. I have no idea.
I just wanted to share something that goes back to 2010, 2011, when we were struggling with the privatization of sections of the park like the Arboretum and Botanical Garden. We had a meeting, a group of us from the Hayden Inner Sunset, with Mark Buell, who was the park commissioner, the head of it.
Well, he was almost president for life.
Right. And it happened to be in our dining room, and there was about 6 or 8 of us, and he agreed to meet with us, and we were discussing, and we said, look, what you're doing is privatizing the park, and that's privatization of public land. And he responded, he said, I hate that word. I prefer site-specific revenue generation. I'll say that again so you can all remember it. Site-specific revenue generation.
Any other questions?
I would just say that he had to do that because they're trying to become, I have my phone, they're trying to become an enterprise agency. And they can't become an enterprise agency unless they are self-sufficient in their funding, in their, you know, budget, like the port or the airport or the MTA or, you know, that kind of thing. So they have to do these things in order to be able to show that they can be self-sustaining. They keep, yeah, it doesn't go into the general fund, and they don't get funded from the general fund either. Under enterprise agencies? Okay. In the microphone. In the mic, so people can hear you.
If you're a revenue agency, the money that you generate, you get to keep in the department, and you do not have to put into the general fund. No, they don't, you know, they don't have to go through the arduous process of an annual budget. They know what they're going to get. They've got a big piece of what they're going to get. And if they can supplement that with bonds, they become more and more insulated. And we have a department that's pretty insulated.
I got a question. So how does this inefficient manner of funding through the bonding process affect our tremendous city deficit? We have a tremendous budget deficit right now. How is that being affected by this inefficient manner in which we're funding Park and Rec through the bonding process? Is my question clear?
Yeah, the city engages in a balancing act that they do not go beyond a agreed upon number in terms of bonded indebtedness. And they don't do a new bond until an old bond is paid off. So the property tax rate has remained relatively steady in San Francisco because San Francisco does that maneuver. I wouldn't want to hazard a guess what the annual debt service is. But it's got to be in the high hundreds of millions, if not maybe $1 billion. I mean, remember, we have a $12 billion municipal budget. And San Francisco used to be the center of bond houses. I mean, back in the day, there's a book that's been written about it. I mean, Bank of America grew rich doing bonds for the city and county of San Francisco. It's what old banking used to be, you know, boring and profitable. They're not leveraged buyouts and they're not financialized mortgages. They're just good old bonds.
So I have a comment and a question, actually. So I'll do the comment first so that somebody can answer the question, hopefully. But the comment is that, you know, along with the illuminating of the botanical garden and so forth, they've announced that they want to do like concerts, rock concerts and stuff there as well at night, which means a lot of noise as well as lighting. And but I'm assuming that this is all also a way of generating revenue, because I assume they're going to charge for these things. So it's just another, you know, another way of putting up a gate and charging people to come in. But my question is this: since they seem to be so set on raising revenue, why do they negotiate such crappy deals with people like the Sky Wheel? I mean, they got almost no money out of it.
I don't believe it's about raising revenue. I mean, I think they've got a lot of revenue. I think they're very flush. I think this is about a vision. You know, I think it's pretty ideological. You know, that a guy like Moritz, I mean, you should read what he has written. I mean, he wrote a biography of a rather famous biography of Mr. Apple. And I mean, he is an initial investor of Rio Vista. He's going to build a new city in Rio Vista. He has a real vision that, you know, what is staggering to me is so lacking in the public sector. So we get, you know, guys like Moritz and you know, Mr. Twitter coming up with, you know, notions and innovations that, I mean, we all understand that we don't have a space program without Musk. NASA doesn't exist. They're totally dependent upon Elon Musk to get satellites in the air. It's an extraordinary kind of shrinking of the public sector and this unbelievable expansion of the private sector And, and, and that's how I see what this is about. That this is much more about redefining San Francisco, redefining who we are as a city. And, you know, along the lines of, you know, a private vision, a vision that sees privatization as a net good, a vision that sees, I mean, I've done advocacy around affordable housing, and back in the day, the public sector believed that you get a permit to do private housing, you get to mint money. So we want something for that. Yes, 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 yes. Well, there'll soon be many more people with ropes gonna hang Dean, but they won't get them. So the paucity of imagination and reach in the public sector is, for me, more disappointing than the overreach of, you know, egomaniacal buffoons. And I mean, they are. Anybody who thought fentanyl life was a clever and telling blow for their side needs professional help. You know, probably an assassin. But it's staggering that, you know, the paucity of their notions doesn't keep them from spending large amounts of money and an incredible amount of energy trying to implement them. And I think that's what we're up against.
Yeah, it's totally like privatizing, right? It's just taking what was public and turning it private, because that's their whole narrative is, if public is dirty and homeless and drug riddled and, you know, whatever, inefficient and a waste of money, then what's private is clean and shiny and safe, right? But it's like, for who, you know? So privatize Golden Gate Park, so all that's why there's so much Together SF and YIMBY, you know, overlap. You know, it's like privatize Golden Gate Park so all the tech families can come in there and feel like good about themselves and safe and see art or whatever that reflects who they are. But yeah, like what Calvin was saying, and but that's how it bleeds into all these other areas too. So it's like what's happening with Golden Gate Park is happening, you know, with housing and all these other areas in the city also.
Oh, can't hear you.
Yeah, which is why we should, I mean, be engaged in it, because it's not like like they can be investing money in us and in like what's something that's really public and all this time and energy. So, yeah. All right, last, I think we'll end with Connor.
What I see here is that it's just another form of civic and regulatory capture by private interests. And it's happening in Congress, it's happening in academia, it's happening with our public lands, turning everything into a concession. And it's really depressing, because the trend is the wind is in their sails. It's getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And Elon Musk is kind of the poster boy of this, but it's all of them. It's Peter Thiel, it's the Kochs, it's it's Tom Steyer, You know, it goes, it's not even a particular um, right or left ideology that's going on here. It's rich people are taking over and determining how everybody else lives. And, you know, and they can do things like flood the zone with oxycodone like the Sacklers did and so forth. And then the public has to clean up the messes of what these people do. And it's really demoralizing. One of my ongoing peeves in life is that we just really don't have anything called democracy now. It's a charade, you know, that basically the tail is now wagging the dog. We're calling it a democracy, and it's just a charade. And it's thank you for doing this, but it's more depressing than I can imagine. It's like,
Well, if you need to get cheered up, just go into Golden Gate Park and look at all the new installations.
But here we are. Here we are. How is that? You know? So the question for us is, here we are, so what? You know? But I think there is a role. I mean, the great thing about Americans is they have no historical memory. I mean, you know, our friends the Palestinians and our friend the Jews have a long history and mental history. They never forget anything. They never forget one slight after another. The Irish, nobody loves to kill an Irishman more than an Irish. We're lucky we have historic amnesia. And maybe we forget ourselves and actually behave as if we're a democratic people. Because you're right, the direction, the trend line, Barack Obama is absolutely wrong. It does not trend towards greater justice. It trends to power. And we have to create countervailing power.
Well, thank you again to Calvin and Kathy for being here and for those great presentations. Yeah, so I wanted to thank everyone, and I think we had one last announcement before we wrap up 2023.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bianca Von Cree. I'm a candidate for the United States House of Representatives. I'm running against Nancy Pelosi for the second time. And all these comments just really got me teed up because I'm so anxious to get rid of Pelosi's functional Republican regime. I'm told I'm the AOC of the West Coast. And it's a proud designation, particularly as I turned my Archbishop against her. I turned other small businesses against her. If you all remember Erica Kios and her hair salon, that was good stuff. But this time around, we're in a very unique place because it looks like I'm just going to be taking her straight through the general election. And what's happening is that the normal Republican perennial guy just had it. So he's out. And I've got a bunch of congratulations from some of the log cabin Republican people saying that, yeah, you're going to be picking up a lot of those votes. So that and with hopefully the progressive votes, which I value very much, I will take her to the general election and hopefully she'll lose or withdraw from the election, which some Democratic clubs are asking her to do. That every time I introduce myself and I say what I'm doing, everyone says, "Oh my God, that woman's running again. Are you kidding me?" Is she not picked up on all the hints with Mitch McConnell, Joe Biden, and Dianne Feinstein literally turning into a vegetable in front of us and the nation? My God. And however, and I'm guessing this is not a Pelosi crowd, which is great because I've been dealing with it all week. There's two things that really we need to reconsider. One, we need to have new ideas, and Pelosi just cannot deliver that. I'm taking my Green New Deal proposal back to formula to integrate fusion ignition. Nobody else has done that so far. For Pelosi, fusion is what she orders for dinner. Okay. We're having serious discussions about first contact with extraterrestrial life in Congress. And for Pelosi, the word alien means somebody who busts her table. So these things have got to change, and with your support, we'll get there. I love doing this. We've expanded the organization to north of 500 people worldwide, from Kyoto to Istanbul, all working online and collaborating and generating content. So I really appreciate being here today, and I appreciate the time you afforded me. I left some flyers back there. If anybody wants to grab some and see what I'm more about, it's the traditional stuff: Green New Deal, universal basic income, Medicare for all. And I think universal basic income speaks to the small businesses in this community, because it takes the burden of support for the individual employee from the employer to society, which seems more equitable. And I think we can all agree on that too. So Bianca for San Francisco.org, that's my website. And I am Bianca Von Creek. Thank you very much. Do you have any questions? Me after.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming and zooming. We'll see you next year.
Thank you. Excellent meeting. Excellent meeting. Keep up the good work.
Thanks, Nick.